Hello, my name is Alexandra Stewart and I'm really excited to be able to read you an extract from a book I've written called Everest, the remarkable story of Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay, with some awesome illustrations by the brilliant Jo Todd Stanton. As the title of the book would suggest, this is a story of two remarkable men, Ed Hillary and Tenzing Norgay, both from very humble backgrounds. Ed was a beekeeper from New Zealand and Tenzing Norgay was a yak herder from Nepal. And in 1953, they were the first people to reach the top of the world's tallest mountain, which is, of course, Everest. To put the height of Everest into perspective, it is just lower, the summit's just lower than the cruising height of a jumbo jet. So climbing it is incredibly challenging, physically and mentally, and really dangerous. And back in 1953, it was even more dangerous because Ed and Tenzing and the team of climbers and Sherpas and porters who helped them get to the top didn't have the technology, the kit, and the knowledge of Everest and the knowledge of altitude and the effects of altitude on the human body that we have nowadays, that we all benefit from nowadays. So I'm going to read you an extract from the book which describes their final ascent. They've just spent a really grim night high up on the mountain, at the highest camp on the mountain, on a very narrow ledge. They haven't had much sleep because they've been worrying all night that they are going to be blown off the mountainside because the winds are very strong up there, and they've also not been able to sleep very much because they haven't had enough oxygen in their tanks. They can't waste the oxygen in their tanks on sleeping. They've got to save that for the final climb. So they've had a pretty wretched night. They're tired and they're cold, but they've just got to garner all their energy for this final push. So here we go. When their oxygen quota ran out, they awoke feeling cold and wretched. With their supplies carefully calculated, they couldn't afford to waste any more on such luxuries as sleep. At 4 a.m. on the 29th of May, Hillary and Tenzing began to prepare for their final departure. Hillary had removed his boots before going to sleep, and with the temperature at minus 27 degrees Celsius, they had frozen solid. He had to thaw them out over the primus stove before he could pull them on again. At 6:30 a.m, the pair set off towards the south summit. As the slope became steeper, the conditions grew worse. With the deep and unstable snow shifting under their feet, both Hillary and Tenzing knew there was a strong chance they'd be swept off the mountain. Gripped by fear, they decided to keep moving forward to the south summit, where they were relieved to find conditions improved. From the south summit, they continued on to the summit ridge. Moving steadily but cautiously, they came to a vertical rock face that was 40 feet or 12 metres high. This was the final obstacle standing between them and the top. Wondering how on earth they could climb it, Hillary noticed a thick layer of ice clinging to the face of the rock had begun to break away. Taking a chance, he squeezed into the crack between the rock and the ice, and here he is. With every ounce of his strength, he wriggled his way up to the top. Tenzing quickly followed on behind. Had the ice given way under their weight, they would have plunged down the mountain to certain death. Once at the top, the pair wasted no time in continuing their journey upwards. Moving slowly and sapped of energy, they began to wonder how much longer they could go on for. But before these thoughts could take hold, they found themselves standing on a patch of snow, surrounded by nothing but sky in all directions. And there they are, on the summit of Everest. The view from the top. Below them were the other mighty Himalayan peaks of Makalu and Kanchenjunga, and to the north stretched the Tibetan plateau. They had done it. As Hillary moved to shake Tenzing's hand, a euphoric Tenzing threw his arms round Hillary. It was a historic moment, but with their limited oxygen supplies, the pair had little time to revel in their triumph. Hillary removed his oxygen mask and quickly pulled out his camera. He photographed Tenzing standing on the summit with his ice axe and the United Nations, Indian, Nepalese and Union Jack flags which were tied to it, fluttering in the wind. He then photographed the views down the mountain to provide evidence that they had indeed reached the top. Meanwhile, Tenzing dug a hole in the snow and placed sweets, chocolate and a coloured pencil given to him by his daughter inside it. These were offerings to the gods of Everest, giving thanks for their safe passage. Hillary performed a similar ritual, bearing a crucifix that John Hunt, who was the leader of the expedition, had asked him to leave at the summit. Finally, the pair removed the flags from Tenzing's ice axe and pushed them into the snow. Their time up, they turned round to retrace their steps back down the mountain. Hilary didn't think to ask Tenzing to take a photograph of him. After all, he later said, the summit of Everest was no place to teach a novice how to use a camera. So incredibly, there's no picture of Ed Hillary standing on the top of Everest. Meanwhile, at Advanced Base Camp on the Western Coombe, John Hunt was waiting nervously for news. And you've got to remember that in those days they didn't have the radio technology or the iPhones that we have these days. There was no way John Hunt could find out that they had reached the top until they returned and told him they'd done so. So he had a long and nervous wait. It wasn't until the following afternoon that he discovered what had happened. George Low had waited for Hilary and Tenzing on the South Col, and they trekked back to the camp together. As they approached the team, Hilary and Tenzing were too tired to shout or wave, but an ecstatic Low waved his ice axe at the summit. Hunt rushed to greet them, and with tears in his eyes, threw his arms round Hilary and Tenzing. I hope you enjoyed that extract. There's plenty more adventures to read about in the book, but thank you very much for listening.